So, everyone's been talking about Baldur's Gate 3, and no wonder. It's a game that's taken the internet by storm. Although I noticed that every game review or video on it I've come across has been doing nothing but saying vague compliments or trying to ride the wave of the game's popularity. So, if you're wanting an honest review of the game, look no further. Everyone knows I'm a lore aficionado when it comes to many things, Forgotten Realms certainly being included. I've been a diehard fan of the realms for 20 years now, and that means I've always had an interest in both the novels and the video games. I bought Baldur's Gate 3 2 years ago when it was on early access, and I played what it had back then, despite the enormous bugs. I maybe spent a couple of hours on it. Fast forward to August 3rd, and since that day a week ago, I've played close to 50 hours of the game. I've been obsessed with the game, and for good reason. It's an incredible game that one does not see every day, which is bittersweet because we used to. BioWare, Obsidian, Bethesda, Lionhead Studios, even fucking EA used to crank out quality RPG experiences in the late 90s up to the early 2010s. And yes, I mean EA before they acquired BioWare. The KOTOR series, the Mass Effect trilogy, Neverwinter Nights and its sequels and expansions, Dragon Age, Fable 1 and 2, and dare I say Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and the other installments including the Dark Alliance games, not to be confused with the most recent Dark Alliance, which really has nothing to do with the previous ones. Honestly, Baldur's Gate 3 harkens back to when truly great RPGs roamed the earth, and this type of game has been extinct for about 10 years. There are some outliers, like Elden Ring and Red Dead Redemption 2, but Baldur's Gate stands up to its fantasy predecessors in a style that we really don't see anymore. But let's get to the specifics. Baldur's Gate 3's story is interesting, immersive, and yet concise. One might even say it stands up to Baldur's Gates 1 and 2 in terms of writing, which is high praise. The previous installments of the series might be a bit hard to get back to after modern graphics, but I think everyone needs to experience them at least once, and I know I'm going to go back to them once I'm truly finished with this game. In fact, playing Baldur's Gate 3 just makes me want to play the others again. But back to the game in question. The story in 3 is interesting, and the side quests don't feel like filler. They help make the game truly feel wonderful, actually. And it's not just a big game with empty space, either. There's literally something to do around every corner. And your choices, actually matter. I know every RPG claims that, but there really is almost an endless way this game could go. Here's an example. I needed to save some gnome slaves from some slavers at one point. We were waiting for a cultist to show up, and since I'm playing a good aligned playthrough, I tried to free the gnomes, and I fought the slavers and the cultist boss. Unfortunately, I was out in the open, and I was fighting 12 units, not including the cultist leader. 5 of the slavers and the cultist boss were all elites. So it was kind of my 4-man team against thrice my number, and after a long battle, they did beat me. They killed me. I loaded the save and went back, and instead of triggering the cultists to show up, I decided to preemptively attack the slavers, and I got in an advantageous position to do it. It was really bloody, but eventually I beat them and healed, and then the cultist showed up. When he did not approach like he did in my last save. He asked me where the slavers were and what happened to them, and I could tell him they fell to infighting, or I could tell him that they abandoned him. I could do a myriad of things. I did tell him, I just said I killed them and he's next. But I was so surprised he actually noticed they were gone, and the game had pre-planned for that. It was just a decision I made in gameplay that changed the boss encounter organically. That's really immersive storytelling. That, and there's cutscenes in the game that sometimes occur with really no forewarning, and half the time I have no idea really what triggered it, so it feels really fresh. The story unfolds in such a way where you really feel like you're along for the ride, and yet you don't feel constrained on any linear path. The gameplay itself is smooth and really user-friendly. In fact, it's even more user-friendly than normal 5e mechanics, which is the D&D edition it's utilizing for the rules. And 5e is known for being very dumbed down compared to older editions. Other than some strategizing and clever saving, as long as you prepare, you'll really do fine in the game. The music isn't particularly noteworthy, but it's fair when you catch a tune. It's not as iconic as the theme from Larian Studios' Divinity series, and it doesn't really make your heart swell like Howard Shore's music from Lord of the Rings, but it's passable, I'll say. The graphics are really nice. I can even run it on my ancient as hell GTX 980, which is pretty insane. I'm definitely going to need an upgrade to upgrade my graphics card so I can play Armored Core 6 and Starfield, but I digress. The game looks great, graphically. Honestly, I could go on for hours about how this is a really good game. But this wouldn't be a review without talking about some problems, and despite what people are saying, there are problems with the game. In fact, the problems are pretty easy to spot. I would say the game's amazing virtues sort of makes the problems more obvious. It's actually a really hard game to quantify when it comes to like out of 10, because I feel like compared to a lot of recent RPGs, it's like a 9.8 out of 10. But I would say compared to what its potential is, it's like a 7.5 out of 10, which is weird. But I think it's an amazing game, and I think it's one of the greats up there with Elden Ring and the new Legend of Zelda games and Red Dead Redemption 2. But still, there are some problems, and let's talk about them. Though, sorry, I know I keep deliberating, but let me give a side note. My complaints moving forward in no way mean that I think Larian did a poor job or that the game is not incredible. However, I think if Larian made updates to the game in the future, fixing the following issues would make Baldur's Gate 3 very close to perfection. Okay, the first major weakness of the game is character customization. You have many hairstyles, many facial tattoos, and a bunch of eye colors to choose from. However, you have no sliders for really your features. You can't change your nose, you can't change your eye shape, you can't change your mouth, you can't change your ears. You just have 6 or 7 preset faces, and honestly, none of them look great. In fact, unless you're going for a specific archetype of a character, it's extremely hard to look good in this game. And just as with the facial features, your body size is limited as well. You can't be fat, stout, athletic, really anything except 4 preset sizes: small male and small female, and large male and large female. And while you can add tattoos to your face, you can't add tattoos anywhere else in your body. You can change the size and features of your fucking genitals, but you can't add a scar on your chest or a tattoo on your arm. You know what the character creator really reminds me of? It reminds me of Star Wars: The Old Republic's character creator. And if a game as intricate and well-crafted as Baldur's Gate 3 has customization like an MMO, even MMO that's known for its storytelling, it's kind of lacking. For me, I decided to make a character from one of my published stories, a sword mage named Marcus with a K, and I had to pretty much compromise everywhere. I would say Marcus is slightly on the tall side and he's fit, but as I only had 2 choices of size, I went with the closest, and he's now a Herculean giant. It really took me a while to make my character, and not for the usual reason it takes a long time to make a character. It wasn't because there were so many options, it's just I liked none of the options before me, and I had to add some facial hair to my guy to make him presentable. Of course, this criticism is only for relatively human-like characters. Just like Elder Scrolls, the beast races all look cool regardless. And the Dragonborn looks great in this game. Half-Orc, I think, looks great. But you can't help but kind of cringe at most of the man and elf faces, and unlike Elder Scrolls, you can't fine-tune things as well here. Sure, this was likely due to graphical decisions they made for all the cutscenes your character would be in, but it's still there, and between you and me, I've seen about 1,200 cutscenes, and maybe in 3 of them has my character emoted in any way. I would say in an immersive RPG, if you can't put on the screen what is in your head other than in the most remote way possible, that is a weakness. And this also shows itself in the game. Most of the characters, and I mean not your character, but like most of the NPCs look worn or kind of strange, except for a few notable exceptions. I think Astarion looks every inch of what he is, and I dig his design. And Lysel is well designed too. And yeah, a lot of NPCs look okay. But sometimes there's uncanny valley feeling when you interact with some of the NPCs. And I would put that down to the limited character creator. And I think, honestly, like people like Dragonborn or Tieflings or stuff like that, they're always going to look like themselves. But like when something's a human, you can really tell that that looks weird. Okay, so let's get to the elephant in the room. This is my biggest complaint of like the game in general, I would say. The companions. Baldur's Gate series is known for its wide array of colorful companions. Their great dialogue, interactions, and truly interesting backstories. In fact, tonight when I was driving home from work, I literally listened to almost an hour of character dialogue from Baldur's Gate 1, and I was just digging how fun they still sounded. And yes, in Baldur's Gate 3, Larian definitely tried. You can tell they tried. They gave every companion an extensive backstory you can delve into and gave them cutscene events that make them feel like a part of the game experience, and the origin characters do have stuff connected to the overall story, which is good. It's too bad that, at best, the companions you get are okay. And that's not great. Let's get the big stuff out of the way. There are no dwarves, gnomes, halflings, dragonborn, or half-orc companions at all. That, and you can barely say there are really elf companions. And having no followers that represent any of them takes away a quarter of the appeal of D&D right there. And yes, okay, I know you'll say that their race or species doesn't matter, and it wouldn't if these companions that you do get really made you gravitate to them. But they don't. Nowhere in the game have I felt like a companion truly had my back, or I felt like I could call them an old friend in real life. None of them were your bro. There's no Garrus in this game, or Rex, or Sten, or Varric, or Alistair, or Canderous Ordo, or HK-47, or any of the iconic figures of the truly great RPGs out there. And that is the stuff that Baldur's Gate is supposed to be made out of. They somehow made it a truly immersive game that you love to play, while simultaneously you're surrounded by NPCs that are fairly boring. I mean, okay, look. I am curious about their backstories at first, and there are good concepts, I will say that. But I will not be interested in exploring them in a second playthrough, really. It'll be more of a chore, other than maybe 2 exceptions, and even then it's nothing to write home about. Now, I'm not saying these companions are shit, or that they have no good qualities. Sometimes they can be witty, sometimes they can be charming, sometimes they can make you smile, but you don't truly feel for any of them beyond exploring the game's romance options. And honestly, there aren't many good options in that arena either, at least in my opinion. In Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, in my opinion, Viconia Devere has the most interesting backstory, the most compelling character redemption arc, and is probably the best romance option I've seen in gaming. Currently, my guy is romancing Shadowheart, and while she's cute and probably the best option in the game that I've seen, and her backstory is, kind of fun, she's sort of a worse Viconia with strange values. In fact, the companion approval is wild. There are times in this game where I choose what is clearly the most pragmatic and smartest choice in a situation, and because it was either potentially seen as not selfish, or potentially seen as good, or potentially seen as bad, you'll get the weirdest disapprovals. Especially from Shadowheart and Astarion. Shadowheart, because she follows an evil goddess that is banned across the realms for just how evil she is, and that's wild because, the Forgotten Realms lets followers of the god of murder walk around. But if you happen to be kind of mean, Shadowheart will not like it. And unless you always go for the most selfish option, even if it's mind-numbingly dumb or it hurts the group, including Astarion himself, Astarion will dislike it. I swear to God, the companion opinions of you are like a Twitter comment section. Some are okay, but there's way too many insane reactions, and there's not a lot of logic in them. And speaking of very little logic and romance options, while I praise the game with allowing you complete freedom to sleep or have a romance with whoever you or your character wants, The romance blossoms so suddenly it takes you by surprise, and it comes with very little forewarning. I've tried to make friends with every companion, and at least 3 times have I stumbled into my character almost kissing them when I really thought we were just talking. The game sort of insists on romance a lot of the time. And never before in a game have I had to tell characters, "Oh, I'm not interested," more than maybe twice, much less the 6 times I've seen it in one playthrough, and that is all in the first third of the game. It's very strange in my experience, and while I believe Larian wants to make it so you can be gay, straight, bisexual, pansexual, whatever, it's mostly just succeeded in making everyone else in Faerun pansexual and called it a day. And now let's segue into dialogue options. As I said before, I adore the amount of choices you can have in this game. I feel like I could play this game a dozen times and I still feel like I have places to explore and choices to make differently. However, I do think Larian focused more on choices rather than flavor, if that makes any sense. I feel like while I can make a lot of things happen differently in different playthroughs, I can't really roleplay well with the dialogue I am granted. And I also feel like a lot of the game dialogue, mine or the NPCs, don't really explore the lore of Forgotten Realms and makes me feel like I'm in that world. It just doesn't do that. And like, sometimes I can answer in a way a Baldurian would speak, or I can answer in a way that represents my class, but I feel like it's more tell than show. And I don't think I can really be who I want to be as much as I would like to be. This kind of reminds me of Dragon Age Inquisition, actually. In Inquisition, I did my first playthrough as a human who wielded a 2-handed greatsword, and I felt like the dialogue was fine. You know, it had a certain style, but I didn't notice it. But I tried a second playthrough, and I wanted to roleplay as a classic, gruff, no-nonsense dwarf character. But when I played the game, there were no options that made me feel like I could conceivably be that. Every option that seemed the roughest or the most curt was more like, well, perhaps I might inform the Duke of your infidelity, and we shall see who has the last laugh, and I couldn't complete the second playthrough. It's somewhat similar in this game. And to go back on the lore, you don't hear a lot about the local sayings, you don't hear much about large cities like Waterdeep or dragon turtles in the surf or people exclaiming, "By Torm," and things like that. Though I will say, as the game continues, it gets more lore-friendly, but I felt like it could have a pinch more just across the game. And let's get to the final item on our list. Retcons, and the legacy of the past games. Baldur's Gate 3 has big shoes to fill. A lot of young people will play this game, and this will be their first installment into the series, just kind of like how a lot of people played Witcher 3 and never bothered to touch Witcher 1 or 2, which I felt like is a shame. Witcher 2 is still my favorite. So they will not really understand this, but people who've played the other games, or at least respects them, they might be a little disappointed. Retcons is something I take extremely seriously. In fact, I think I take it more seriously than anything else I've talked about in this video. The mark of a good sequel is a sequel that not only continues the story and expands it, but it does not attempt to detract the qualities of its predecessors. If it in any way attempts it, that is a black mark on its record. Hence why the Star Wars sequels were so hated. Hence why the Halo TV series was shit. Hence why the Rings of Power was so contentious. And I want to state that I don't hate all retcons. If a past series has something that was widely perceived as dumb, or there was an aspect that never got resolved in a way that was meaningful, then sure, you can retcon things to make it neater. But if you attempt to make your game or movie or book better by attempting to attack its beloved precursor, then you're committing one of the mortal sins of fiction. And I state this all to say that a large part of Baldur's Gate 3 is immaculate, but there's a few instances of retconning and destroying story or character arcs from the previous series. I won't specify for spoilers, but that is not okay at all. In fact, I think out of everything I've said so far, that is the thing that needs changed the most. But, again, at the end of the day, Baldur's Gate 3 is an awesome experience. It's well worth the money. And Larian Studios really put their heart into this game, and you can feel it with every second you're in it. I highly recommend this game. and I hope you found this video informative. All my opinions are my own, of course, and I'd mean a lot if you liked, shared, and subscribed, and all that jargon. And leave a comment if you like to, because I always like hearing people's opinions. Okay guys, have a great day.